Pride and Prejudice is a comedy of romantic entanglement written by Jane Austen in 1813, follows the lives of Elizabeth Bennett and Fitzwilliam Darcy. Their families, social backgrounds, and own prejudices about class distinction play a significant role in their relationship. The novel delves into themes of love, marriage, and the impact of social status on people's lives and decisions. Originally published anonymously in 3 volumes, the story is a classic in the literary world. The Bennett family, made up of Mr. and Mrs. Bennett and their 5 daughters Elizabeth, Jane, Mary, Catherine, and Lydia, live in the modest Longbourn estate in the fictional village of Meriden, Hertfordshire. The property is entailed and can only be inherited by a male, which poses a significant problem for the future of the 5 female siblings. To ensure their future, Mrs. Bennett is determined to marry off her daughters to wealthy men. The arrival of Charles Bingley, a wealthy and single man renting the nearby manor of Netherfield Park, sets the plot of Pride and Prejudice in motion. The Bennett family attends a ball hosted by Mr. Bingley, where Jane, one of the sisters, is impressed by his manners. At the same event, Mr. Darcy, a wealthy and reserved aristocrat, is also present. Elizabeth requests to dance with him, but he declines, leading to negative perceptions of him among the other attendees. Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy encounter each other at various social gatherings over the course of several weeks, and he gradually becomes drawn to her. Meanwhile, Jane's relationship with Mr. Bingley also progresses. However, when Jane falls ill and is forced to stay at Mr. Bingley's residence, Elizabeth treks through muddy fields to visit her, arriving at the house in a disheveled state. The snobbish Miss Bingley, who also wishes to marry Mr. Darcy, takes an immediate dislike to Elizabeth and becomes openly hostile when she sees Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy appearing to be friendly with each other. As Jane recovers, both sisters return to Longbourn where they are visited by a local minister, Mr. Collins, who is said to inherit their home. Meanwhile, the Bennett siblings become friendly with a group of soldiers stationed nearby, and Elizabeth is particularly interested in one of them, George Wickham, who warns her to be cautious of Mr. Darcy, claiming that he cheated him out of his rightful inheritance. Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth, much to the pleasure of Mrs. Bennett, but Elizabeth declines, causing injury to Mr. Collins' pride. When winter arrives, Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy depart for London, leaving Jane heartbroken. Around the same time, they learn that Mr. Collins has become engaged to a local girl who is a friend of Elizabeth's, Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte candidly tells Elizabeth that she does not love Mr. Collins and is only marrying him for financial security and to have a home of her own, as her family is poor. The marriage of convenience takes place. With the majority of men gone during the winter, the Bennett siblings remain single much to their mother's dismay. In the spring, Elizabeth visits Charlotte, who claims to be well cared for and content with her decision for a financially secure but loveless marriage. Charlotte now resides near the home of Mr. Collins' benefactor, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who happens to be Mr. Darcy's aunt. Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy unexpectedly come across each other and he proposes marriage to her, but she declines, criticizing him for his arrogance and unfriendliness, and bringing up his wrongdoing towards Wickham by denying him his rightful inheritance. She also mentions that his pride was hurt by her honesty and her concerns about their relationship. Later, Mr. Darcy writes a letter to Elizabeth in which he exposes Wickham as a habitual liar and reveals that Wickham's resentment towards him is due to Mr. Darcy preventing him from getting close to his sister Georgiana. It turns out that Wickham has many negative traits, such as being a gambler and a fraudster. The letter causes Elizabeth to re-evaluate her opinion of Mr. Darcy, but she remains uncertain about him. Elizabeth devises a plan to visit Pemberley, the Darcy's estate in northern England, ensuring that Mr. Darcy will not be present, so that she can gather first-hand information about him from the estate's servants. They all hold a very favorable view of their master, describing him as generous and kind. She receives a letter from home that informs her of one of her siblings, Lydia, having run away with Wickham, which becomes a pressing issue as it would bring shame to the Bennett family if they were to be found living together out of wedlock. Elizabeth hurries home to search for Lydia, who is eventually found. Wickham agrees to marry Lydia, with the condition that he will receive an annual income and that Mr. Darcy will provide it. Elizabeth remains uncertain about her feelings for Mr. Darcy, but as she learns more about him and his actions, she begins to see him differently. Ultimately, she comes to the realization that she loves him and they reconcile and marry. The novel concludes with all members of the Bennett family happily married and settled in their new lives.